Sure. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Oh,
Does it work, the mic? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hello, everybody. So we're very excited to this tonight to welcome at Paris-Malaquais School of Architecture a new guest, Stephen Bates. It's a great honor to have him. And Margot Dario is going to introduce Stephen in a few minutes. So let me just remind you that this series of lectures is dedicated to Europe and to the way the very notion of Europe relates to architecture. So we'd be happy to have your opinion on this specific
I hope I
question.
can answer that.
Yeah, you can. And so that's the last lecture of for this year, for a series of 6 lectures. I think that next year we have 3 more lectures on the same topic, but we will maybe tell a bit more about this in a few weeks. And thanks to Federico Ferrari and Pascal Richer for having organized this series and to have this idea. So maybe Margot now.
So, hi everyone. Stefan, welcome here in Paris-Malaquais. So, Stephen Bates, you are architect. You are the founding partner of the office Sergison Bates Architects, based in London and in Brussels. You are also a teacher, professor of urbanism and housing at the TU in Munich. I'm sorry, I will not did it in German. Where you explore the practical and theoretical aspects of city making and domesticity and the various issues connected with the relationship between these two scales. So I have to say that we discover your work in France with a series of iconics, but not really iconics, houses and collective housings, but not spectacular architecture, not iconic one, but demanding and rigorous. Some idea of a normal architecture, in fact. We can say it is architecture that makes sense, because you defend an idea, that I quote you, that architecture may heighten the atmospheric density of a place, and this leaves the ultimate resistance to artificial and the virtual. You title your conference Away from Home, but your housing project teaches that feeling at home is a major subject for you. With your production, we also discover from France a certain vision of the everyday nature of the practice and its project, where the question of materials and their structural properties dialogue with question of language, of rational and site-specific architecture. In my eyes, your work is based on the material and its imaginative dimensions of architecture, emotion, memory, presence. It's also based on uncanny, as Widler say. Maybe, and it was a word pronounced a lot of time this afternoon in the fantastic colloque about spectral architecture organized by the laboratory LIAT today at school. David Chipperfield, himself, in an old article about your film's practice published in a 2G magazine a long time ago, writes, I quote, "Since setting up in the early 19th, Sergison Bates has carved out a distinctive, more European style niche in the UK." So you see me coming. So we can suggest that we can see a question of cultural transfers in your production, a cultural density that we can say maybe it's the very foundation of Europe's existence. Today you are also based in Europe, in Brussels, where you are leading the conversion of the former Citroën garage into the new KANAL Centre Pompidou Cultural Center. And in this lecture, you want to speak about working on domesticity and why, and with the existing, in a way of rethink archetypal typologies, and in a way they redefine authorship. Thank you for coming, Stefan.
Marco, thank you. Thank you, Margot, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to sit down because that's the thing, I have to. So I'm kind of close to your level. The lecture that I wanted to offer today is entitled Away from Home, Toward the Public Interior, and it reflects on a form of practice of exploring the public interior as a place of invitation, as a place of public interaction. And away from home also relates to a form of practice, working on the margins towards a rather open-ended and collaborative design process. So there are kind of a very English thing that there's an ambiguity to the title of Away from Home. So it's both about how to address the space of the public space, the public zone away from home, and for me, always it seems rather nomadic life of our practice. And maybe to understand that interest, I start rather with a biography. You know, I'm from London. This is my adopted city. My children were born in London. And I've always enjoyed the broken fabric and the additive culture and character of London, the way in which it accepts the new against and amongst the old without too much fuss. It's the idea of a city that has tolerance. It's very liberating and something of an inspiration to us. London as a city embodies its past. It embodies ideas of the picturesque, but also of the mercantile. And its condition reflects the complex patterns of ownership and private actions where neither crown nor state has ever held too much sway. And in this strange diversity, there is tolerance. It's a city of many centers. Its richness comes in part from the spaces between, the spaces that connect, the spaces between the very public and the very private. This is a plan of the Bank of England made by Sir John Soane, who worked on the project between 1788 and 1815. So 45 years, that's pretty much the life of an architect. He adjusted and reinterpreted this network of connective realms, routes and ways, the sequence of courtyards of internal and external rooms within this mighty perimeter wall. It is experienced in his intention as a sort of theatrical experience. I always think that Soane was a kind of revolutionary. You know, he was given the commission of the Bank of England, a sort of, at the time in the 18th century, a powerful, expression of control, and he designed a building of great mystery and of theatricality. It's a project that, when you understand its evolution, it sets up a series of spatial episodes, a combination of the grand gesture and linking passages and, let's say, the unknown. I wanted to read this statement to you. Setting ourselves the task of rethinking architecture in the early 1950s, we meant by as found not only adjacent buildings, but all those marks that constitute remembrances in a place, and that are to be read through finding out how existing built fabric of the place had come to be as it was. It, as found, is above all the property of a thing, not the thing itself, and not the activity that produced it. A statement very typical of the Smithsons, somewhere between kind of poetry and critical observation. Architects who were increasingly influential on our early practice, a way of how to see the world, in a way, how to see architecture, how to pitch, how to pitch yourself as an architect. And from the very beginning, Jonathan Sergison and I understood that our practice was European thinking. But being English islanders, we found ourselves working on the margins. We were combining research with writing and building, which is a very un-English combination. Whether it was the small community of architects we knew and talked about architecture with over a period in 1993 to 1994 under the title of Sunday Papers. These included people who are quite well known now: Tony Fretton, Adam Caruso, Peter St. John, Jonathan Wolfe, Mark Pimlott, Irénée Scalbert, the artist Brad Lecour, a sort of funny group of people who none of us had any work, and we met every Sunday morning for 1.5 years to try and work out a position, both for ourselves but also in a way this small community. But we were also working in Europe on competitions, making study trips to Switzerland, to Portugal, to Spain, to Scandinavia. We were making friendships and relationships. It was a small, and remains a small but very connected world that goes beyond boundaries and borders and generations. It's linked by fine threads that demonstrate a kind of shared interest in place, in craft, in ideas. And with success of many of that group came this rather marginal relationship to place, to culture, to language. But from my personal point of view, writing emerged as a very important part of practice, not just to record ideas, but also to speculate. And I wrote this text in Papers 3, 10 more rooms, after the paper before, which was 10 rooms. The 10 rooms were actually about domestic space, and 10 more rooms began to contemplate the condition of the public room. It was a preparation, you could say, of working beyond housing. And it referenced Mark Pimlott's interest in the public interior, his 2 books, Without and Within, from 2007, and The Public Interior as Idea and Project of 2016. In these wonderful collections of essays, he refers to Peter Celsing's Kulturhuset in Stockholm, built in 66 to 74, a project that maybe many of you have visited. I didn't show you the finished building, but you should know it, and if you don't, you should visit it. But these were the drawing on the left is from the competition. The drawing from the right demonstrates the combination of buildings, but the long bar that faces the main square. He really was exploring ideas of phenomenal transparency and flexibility, as well as ultimate utility. The thought was that everything could be accommodated or projected within this interior. Everything can be seen simultaneously. We're talking here about the mid-60s. There was free movement from space to space. And the director of Kulturhuset was Pontus Hulten. who then became the director of the Pompidou. And he also believed in the interaction and the agency of people, the public, the freedom to see, the freedom to act, the freedom to intervene. Mark also refers to the Fun Palace, an unbuilt project of Cedric Price, commissioned in '61 by the theatre director, Joan Littlewood. Here the building is seen as a stage. The users of the building could do anything they wanted to do within the framework of an adaptable structure, with roofs and components that could appear, could move or disappear in response to need. There is inevitably, and in a way maybe the first time, a conscious interest in the self-participatory aspect of public architecture. It's also indeterminate, and it also is empty. And I think it was the precursor of Pompidou. And the third reference that holds importance both in Mark's writing, but in a way what I take from his writing, was of course Sesc Pompei of Lino Borbardi from 1977 through to 86. Again, these projects are 10, 15-year projects. This is extraordinary how she managed to change and to charge a collection of existing buildings by the reuse and indeed the misuse of what existed. Emptying out, creating clearings, enabling routes that could be claimed, could be reinterpreted and put to new uses. It is an architecture of simple structures that the new added work is simple. It gives the impression that almost anyone could build what is added. And yet the factory, as a consequence, is transformed from a place of work, and you could say from a place of oppression, into one of social interaction. And I think this project led to the Tate Modern of 2000, but also maybe to Frac of Lacaton-Vassal. All these references show the transformation of a structure of necessity into one that has represented a freedom of use, of movement and association. You could understand it as a sheltering structure given over to new uses, behavior aligned with a feeling of clearing in which public life could be made anew. You know, when I first came across these references through that writing, we were concentrating on housing. I always thought that they would become important when the time was right. You know, Mark asked this question, what is the public interior? From my notes, I was writing, it's about freedom, it's about wandering, it's about lingering, it's about doing nothing. It's about limiting consumption. It's about raising consciousness of oneself in the world with others. Indeed, museums as civic actors, cultural resources and places where architecture mediates the encounter between citizens and society. In a way, suddenly a museum is much more than just the repository of history or the repository of art. And I feel we can all appreciate and experience the way that architecture can reinvent the museum, but not only as a place for art, but as a stage for the city itself. And certain themes emerge from that idea, one of agency, one of porosity, and one of representation. Agency being the capacity of architecture to act, to initiate, and to empower others. Porosity to render the museum infrastructure public and accessible. The multiple uses of spaces allowing an appropriation of space. And representation means the architecture as a means of communication. What does that mean in the reuse of a building? That the original, let's say the conventional ideas of architectural representation are not so valid. And I feel that these three themes are encapsulated by a broader idea of layering, And I'd like to quote Alison Smithson again. Our conscious concern since the mid-70s has been with an aesthetic of overlapping and grids, because we believe there is space for illusion between superimposed layers, a place for the activities and interpretations of those who occupy it. In other words, she is indicating that through layering there are spaces between, just as I described the spaces of the city that we can all experience. They're places of tolerance, and they are also informed by temporality. And so I wanted to, contemporary art had already an established museum and indeed a profile with a good collection, maybe one of the best collections in Flanders, and a vision about who they were. They were housed in an existing building which was not conceived as a museum, and they were very local in their attitude. And yet they developed a new brief under new directorship with new ambition, an ambition to make a tower, a vertical museum. A vertical museum, you know, it lies against all typologies, it lies against all references. A site that takes its place on the edge of the river Scheldt, but within the cityscape of Antwerp. A tower that could be, in our eyes, likened to a harbour silo, which visually asserts Antwerp as a city along the Scheldt, a city of fashion, a city of art. But it could also be a symbol of production, we thought, resembling a crane or a tower, but resembling the pride and the skill of the different guilds that the city of Antwerp is so known for. In other words, it could be an addition to a powerful tradition, and it could have a personality. In 1975, the artist Gordon Matta Clark created, on the left-hand side, Day's End, by illegally cutting large sculptural openings into an abandoned industrial hangar on Pier 52 in the harbour in New York City. An office baroque on the right-hand side of 1977 was the result of an international invitation by Antwerp to create a similar project, but in an empty office building opposite the city landmark, Het Steen, which is like a castle. And after Matta Clark's premature death in 1978, a foundation was created to save Office Baroque. And while the building in the end was demolished, the donations collected from artists for the foundation to save it formed the basis of the Mucha collection. In other words, Matta Clark is deeply connected to Mucha. I mean, his work, as you know, or if you don't, you should explore it, is about cutting, but it's about connecting. The plan that we propose in Mucha was also about connecting. It was built on the ground, the building bridges, two parts of the city, the River Scheldt on the left-hand side and the South Park on the right. It is porous, it's accessible from all sides. The public space flows in and out. It has multiple entrances, it's connective. It's the size of a city block. And it demonstrates a plinth which is public, a plinth which reaches out and draws in. It also, in fact, in our proposal, had a barge that was moored on the river. And so the museum, through this flexible barge building, on a building on a barge, would be able to sail into the city centre. So the art could come to the city, not just the visitor come to the art. This is a place, we thought, that opens itself to the city. There are no thresholds. So unlike the traditional museum that sits on a platform, the ground floor of the museum is at the ground level of the street. It offers a generous exhibition hall, which we call the hangar, a spacious public hall where everyone is welcome, a space which is both for production and for presentation. And above this hangar, this plinth, an 80-meter high tower forms this powerful ensemble. You could say an ensemble that is more an infrastructure. And you can see in the image a piece by Kara Walker, an opportunity in this hangar to show extremely large work. I mention this infrastructure because we saw the building as an infrastructure. We presented it at the final jury as an unfinished building, an offer, an opportunity that lies in 6 mega floors with primary and secondary structure that gives flexibility of content. It can be arranged in different ways due to the symmetrical construction of floor heights. And it's visible on the waterfront as an infrastructure. We were inspired by Matta Clark's earlier work of splitting 4 corners, the 1974 project in which he cut into a domestic house. But from that project came a number of other studies, including 4 corners, which is illustrated there. We, if you could say, transferred that idea of 4 open corners to a plan of 4 cores in open corners that give a clear structure of stacked levels with interconnected rooms and platforms. Combined with, on the left, you can see in red, a kind of plug-in, decentralized HVAC system. So you could control the environment, the climate of individual floors. I mean, you have to remember here that a museum is the most unsustainable building type that exists. I'll come back to that later. The hangar at ground floor offers an immediate encounter with art. It is multi-directional. It's 70 meters by 30 meters. It's divided into 3 sort of spatial areas. There are no escalators. It shouldn't be a symbol of consumption, but a symbol of production. 16-meter high at the front, 12 meters in the middle, 7 meters at the back. And from the central vestibule, an internal window that reveals the basement gallery on below. These sections show this idea of a primary and secondary structure and a typical way of arranging that structure, giving spatial opportunity for exhibitions to be organized in different ways, working with this 12-meter high primary structure. And on top, this structure straddles over an existing lock, water lock, that is then preserved as a found relic, but in fact a gallery, an underground gallery with no daylight. In this sectional perspective, we sort of poured the brief into the structure, poured the program that was offered at the competition, because we knew it would change. We felt the building was too big for the museum. The ambition they had was unrealistic. So we demonstrated how their brief could be could occupy the structure, but we also revealed and prompted other ways of using the building alongside a place for art. You can see the auditoriums which are stacked on top of each other, that all form part of a journey, a route, with the at the time, the permanent collection, which is their most treasured possession, on the top of the building, and the temporary galleries above the auditoriums with sort of overflow spaces between. So on the top 2 floors, we were presenting these kind of shell-like spaces. You can see on the right and the left, in concrete, the open corners, just to sort of reveal that to those looking at the image, and a typical arrangement of the permanent, using the permanent collection elements. And in the middle floors, the more, say, transient gallery spaces that could take the visiting exhibitions. The facade, a veil, which grew out to create overflow spaces and open corners in the staircases, places for visitors to pause mid-visit, to reorientate, to meet a friend or so. And the facade comprised 3 layers: an inner layer of hygroscopic heavyweight block, you can see in the stair, to provide thermal stability and moisture buffering, a middle layer of insulation, protecting, reducing the temperature change, and an outer layer of perforated and metal sheets which were upcycled from waste material from the dock industry, acting as a veil providing shade and wind protection to the thermal enclosure. It's a facade that, let's say, presents itself as a symbol from afar, a brightly colored container. At night, open, a public destination, perforate, revealing its interior. And close up, a layered, open facade, reaching out, drawing in. In this image, you can see the plinth measured at the scale of the existing housing. Streets either side, which provide some of the many entrances. And within that plinth, the hangar, which embodies openness. It's vast and flexible and unpretentious, and it invites spontaneous encounters. We imagined that the hangar, and by extension Muka, was a civic third place where art intersects the city. And I think these kinds of porosities redefine the museum as a lived infrastructure rather than as an isolated cultural container. The second project I wanted to show, I didn't explain, but the first project was made in collaboration with the same team who are building KANAL. So that is Noah Architekten from Brussels and EM2N from Zurich. Our collaboration has been so fruitful that it's naturally followed into other collaborations, and that was another opportunity, let's say. This project for the Leuven Performing Arts Building is being carried out by our own office, but together with a technical architect from Antwerp. And it resembles an open market hall. It presents the idea of a flexible and adaptable infrastructure with a kind of resilience of a barn. On the right is a very important barn to me, the Great Coxwell Barn, a building I think was the first bit of architecture I ever encountered as a young boy with my father. But we imagine this theatre or this building as a hard-working tool, a structure and a hull. It was robust in its form. It had a crafted lattice structure and delicate outline to the sky, because it needed to be a landmark. The city wanted a landmark. This is new to us, how to make landmarks, when, as Margot pointed out, our instinct is always for quietness. This needed to be a point of cultural orientation along a cultural root. The Flemish theatre critique, Marianne von Kerkhoven, describes the theatre is in the city and the city is in the world, and the walls are made of skin. She was indicating that the theatre is porous. It should be. It should be breathing and intimately connected to society. And the new building that one makes is adjusted and molded to resonate with what is around while generating extraordinary spaces. We were looking carefully at references, especially the Teatro Officina of Lino Bobardi and Edson Elito, in which the street is allowed to invade the scenic stage. It blurs the boundaries between the stage and the audience. And in Innsbruck, on the left, a rather modest theatre, but has a powerful, say, proximity between performer and audience, achieved by the way the balconies are organized. And in a similar way, the new theatre is designed to expand into the public space of the city, reaching out, drawing in, dissolving the thresholds between the public realm and the space of the theatre. The theatre is here along the main Brusselsstraat with the Raadhuis illustrated on the right at this point, alongside a new park that's being developed at the moment. A building by David Chipperfield here, and in fact we've just finished a building here. We were really interested in how in this medieval city of Leuven, and ancient university city with many historically religious buildings, monasteries, cloisters, churches, how beautiful they are stitched together into the city. They create extraordinary character through the spaces between, the linking spaces, and we were really interested in how we could extend those spaces from this Romansport monastery. This is the theatre here, and an adjoining housing development with an existing building here, an existing church. How we could, create an extension of the public spaces between, from courtyard to passage to alleyway, creating a kind of cross-fertilization, in particular between this Romansport monastery, which is now an art centre, the 30cc art centre, and the new building, and indeed this church, which is used by a circus company for rehearsals. And together with those cultural connections came an interest that the city had, that we were very happy to help with, to open up the river Aar, which is a tributary from the main river in the city. So this is all at the moment underground, but the intention, it is already now open through the work that's the early work before construction of the main building starts, but this extension of the network of water space. The facade of the new building kind of unwraps itself from the existing monastery and rises to form this profile, in a way, therefore, achieving a kind of continuity with the main Brusselsstraat street running along, if you could say, a cross-section through the city. And these undulating roofs and bridging elements connect new and old at the first floor level, and they therefore provide, in fact, integral accessibility that didn't exist in this building. So there's a kind of, not only there's a cultural connection, but now a physical connection that allows the theatre and the art centre to form a single unity. Between a new yard, so this is the plan of the theatre, the river, you can just see the river opening up here, and this new courtyard, which is illustrated on the right. And what this yard did was allow us to open up the theatre along its long edge, which is extremely unusual, where theatres are usually progressively linear in their organisation, from the street to the tickets to the bar to whatever, toilets, into the main theatre space. But by reorienting the building via this courtyard, you could enter the building at any point, including directly into the main theatre space. So there's this powerful idea of the courtyard and the stage becoming a single piece of public space. And that is the transition between the two, is this space, which we call the jardin d'hiver, connecting the two cores, but becoming a kind of interstitial space between the main stage and the garden. It's 68 meters long, and it provides a public space and of course, when necessary, an acoustic separation between the sensitive areas. At basement level, there are green rooms and toilets, and you can see on this first floor that the bridging elements become linking arms that extend the jardin d'hiver across into the existing building. So this is the jardin d'hiver with the courtyard on the right, and this connection at ground level and at first directly into the theatre space. It acts kind of as a foyer, but it also can itself encourage performances and activity that both are directed directly towards the outside or as part of the interior. And the hall, a great lofty hall that boldly expresses its architectural structure, exposes technical infrastructure, and offers full artistic potential. It's an event space that can be much more than a place for theatre, a place for a book fair, or a club, or a gathering, as well as a traditional theatre condition. But to provide flexibility is easy to say, but is fundamental in the way the character of the consequent space is. Because if you are able to have a travelling performance of Jesus Christ Superstar, or a gig, or a chamber orchestra, or a play, all in one space, those of you who will know that that acoustic requirement is fundamentally different. So to make in a fundamentally flexible space, we actually had to create an artificial environment. This was by using what we call an active digital acoustic constellation system. That means an ability to change the acoustic properties of a room electronically by modifying the warmth and reverberation of sound to suit the requirements of any type of space. The main theatre's capacity is 800 to 1,100 people. The stage is 16 meters deep by 15 meters. There is no fixed proscenium. That means that the stage can be positioned anywhere within the hall. But we imagined the building being used, we designed the building primarily for a end-on organization, and then, let's say, proposed what modifications you'd need as you moved the theatre, as the performances required. Here, a sectional perspective that shows the main theatre space, but shows this sort of labyrinth or cellular structure of rooms. The second theatre space I'll show you. And on the ground floor, what we call a live room, a shop front to the venue, a place of invitation, a place that forms part of the public realm of the street. It is as much the community's as anyone else's. It's a space where you can spend time freely buying coffee, a bar at night, a place to work and log in for watching activities of production. And above that, the second performance space of 400 seats with a large window overlooking the city that can also be completely closed off. And this space connects directly to the Jardin d'Hiver at first floor level. And above that, these other rooms for rehearsals with a sprung floor, for a dance floor for the circus group who are going to use this building, and other multi-purpose space in the middle at the top with a bar, the green room at ground floor on the right, all connected by these two cores. We understood that this was about a building within a building, and the concept of the facade was about two layers, an outer layer, like an outer shell of glass, and an inner shell of masonry, providing protection against noise from inside and outside. There was, in a way, a third, more flexible layer of curtains, which you're adding on the inside. It's a layered concept that ensures an appropriate and specific solution can be provided for each part of the facade with respect to the various technical and aesthetic requirements. But its face to the city is a delicately fluted glass facade with metal profiles that unfolds across every surface. You can see a working model that illustrates that kind of shifting of the solid against the transparent. So within this singular form, there are other forms that you begin to perceive at different times of day and at night behind this kind of veil. And on the top, you can see in this model a roof terrace, publicly accessible directly from the courtyard or through the building. You enter into this mesh, this sort of framed space that provides some sense of protection and framing views over Leuven, and also supporting a digital artistic installation. The final project I wanted to show you was this ongoing project in Brussels, the KANAL, we call it, but the Modern and Contemporary Arts Complex. It is housed in the former Citroën car factory that was built in 1933, and it comprises an iconic showroom and a large factory space behind. It's the size of a city block, and we're transforming it into a generous public interior, focusing on cultural production, which houses visual arts, architecture, dance, drama, film, and music. KANAL is an exemplar of reuse, and the Citroën garage was our starting point. A place as found, located alongside the canal and in walking distance from Brussels city centre, a building plot of 100 by 200 meters, so almost a complete city block, which we felt offered kind of unmatched opportunities which would be impossible to achieve with a new building. And rather than a spectacular gesture, our proposal offered an attitude of radical optimism. It was about being open and non-prescriptive, about being spontaneous and instinctive, which we felt was much like the spirit of modern progress in which this building was first created. And in so doing, we allow the original building to become once again a key protagonist in the city. The interior is a fine example of elegant industrial engineering. The glass facade, also a clear expression of its early modernism. It has already experienced many lives. And our ambition as we set out on the project, which we won in competition in 2018, was to trust the building as we found it, to embrace its industrial character and its many layers of use, to transform it with a light touch and a deliberate economy of means, but to add as much as to take away. It needed new elements. It needed to transform from something existing to something new. It's an attitude that led us, both conceptually and in detail, and in every decision. You know, this first visit to the building, as you see it here, with its cloud-like roof, it was extraordinary to experience such a big building made of very small elements. You know, with KANAL, the conventions of the signature building by one celebrity architect have been challenged. As an architectural practice, we founded the three offices, EM2N, Noah Architecten and Sergison Bates, founded Atelier KANAL. One name, many hands, responsible for both the architecture and the interiors. These were delivered with a generous sense of shared authorship. Atelier KANAL, all of you could obviously read this. KANAL will be a little bit English, a little bit Swiss, a little bit Belgian. You know, Atelier KANAL was from the very beginning located in Brussels, but also originally working in the first 2 years within the Citroën factory itself, in close collaboration with the client, Fondation KANAL. And we were learning a lot from the 1 year long program of exhibitions that were held after the competition, before they closed the building for renovation. The existing cross-access of 18-meter wide streets that cut through the former factory and showroom have entrances at each of their 4 ends. They connect all the activities of KANAL and they reach out to the city beyond. And together with the Piano Nobile, which is this platform that was added in the 50s, so not from the original construction, this level here, a level added for more parking at the time within the garage. The streets and this first floor platform cover nearly half of the total area of the building, and they offer unclaimed public space in which institutions, artists, citizens can appropriate. You know, we understood KANAL as a horizontal space that promises unlimited access and walks or even cycles through its public domain. But it would have niches and pockets to hang out, to think or to play, to walk or wander. This is the plan of the building as we found it, of the KANAL, of the Piano Nobile, the first floor, and this, the proposal. The museum is not only a new international beacon in the city, but above all a meeting place for the super diverse neighborhood and the city in which it forms part. For example, the ticket office is not the first thing that you see. Visitors can wander through the building via the wide streets, designed as a continuation of the surrounding urban fabric. They can naturally flow up the existing ramps to the first floor, to read a book, to do their homework in the library, to meet with others, to sit down somewhere. We call it a third place, as was originally formulated by the urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg in his 1989 book, The Great Good Place. This refers to a public space where people spend time other than home, which is the first place, or work or school, the second place. The third place is a familiar place which doesn't have the necessity for consumption. It invites the public, the people, to appropriate, to inhabit the project. 45% of the project is completely free, open to the public. Only the galleries are ticketed for exhibitions. So this approach means that the museum is no longer belongs to the curated art, but becomes part of the city. And we enjoyed the way, therefore, KANAL departs from the traditional museum, offers instead a place of civic gathering. Oriented towards the city centre, the iconic former showroom, which is a 24-metre high glass and steel structure, is pretty much restored. It was the symbol of Citroën. It's known by everyone in the city. It now becomes KANAL's public image. It is, as we described it, a new stage for Brussels. We restored and transformed it to give it a sort of similar grand urban interior character that it used to be. And large sections of the ground floor can be opened up with guillotine windows to allow the new Saint-Colette Square to flow directly into the building. And most of the time this space is unprogrammed. It is in the end a public covered square open for installations, performances, etc. And as this existing car factory with its thin shell could never meet the structural, climatic or acoustic performance of a high-end exhibition space, a brief written by Centre Pompidou here in Paris, we add 3 new houses which are inserted into the expansive volume of the existing structure. Here's one of them prepared. One accommodates shared uses that we call the rassembleur, such as auditorium and offices for the theatre, for the institution. Another, the KANAL architecture, which is formerly the SIVA Architecture Museum, and the third, the new Museum of Contemporary Art. On the left, you see the 5 levels of the museum, offering column-free gallery space, each floor about 725 square meters, each with different ceiling heights, different finishes on the floor, allowing potential for different scenographies and connections via the cores that are either side. There's a 7-meter high basement gallery for video or for other performance, with separate access from the street, so you can go directly from the KANAL side into the basement building, part of the building. These galleries allow a combination of daylight or artificially lit spaces. And on the right, the KANAL architecture, the SIVA, with containing exhibition spaces on the ground floor, and the very valuable archives on different floors with a consultation center illustrated in red there, with a silent library adjacent to it for research. And the energy strategy for such a building, it was impossible to imagine climatizing the whole of this workshop without radically changing its character. And so what we did was we developed what we called an onion concept, which was to concentrate the required highest level of climatic provision in the most compact volumes. So the 3 houses are all highly climatically controlled, and then a second layer of glass houses, part of this onion, provides another level, a secondary level of climatic control, no humidity. So the main galleries are 20 degrees plus and minus 1 with full humidity control. The galleries alongside are 22 degrees plus and minus 2 with no humidity, and then most of the space is slightly controlled from outside temperatures, 15 to 28 degrees, with natural ventilation through the facades. So you can see, for example, at the competition stage, the main gallery level. In fact, this is the top floor gallery. the glass houses that adjoin the main volumes, and the workshop space, of course, all open for installation and performance, but also to be left empty. The idea was that this space between would be a city, within a city, a covered public space. There are minimal interventions made to preserve the industrial authenticity, but also the granting of new uses and the recognition, a consciousness of new uses. This is the scary AI. You'll see a few people kind of morph into different people if you watch carefully. There's a kind of exciting simultaneity that's offered in such a big building, where when the building opens in November, there'll be 10 different events going on at the same time. That sense that how do you make comfortable space in such a big volume? And I think these 3 houses and the spaces between them allow you to actually find yourself completely alone in the building. Just to add in a way, because this is a project that could take a day to describe, but there are 2 other aspects I wanted to touch on was the colour and furniture strategy. They really were part of this open-ended collaborative process in which we then developed the colour concept, collaborating with artist Sarah Smolders, and indeed the bespoke furniture system. But the colour strategy starts with an idea of the floor. This is the final layer of 3 different layers that the floor is painted, that trace and reflect the various patterns and colours indeed that have been applied on the floor over the last nearly 100 years. And the intention is that that they will wear away, because it's floor paint. Certain areas will wear away, and what you'll see underneath is the layer below that. So there's a sort of conceptual idea of the traces of the past applied within the floor space. And then while our original intention was to just brush the structure, we then discovered with tests that there was chrome 6 in the paint that could not be exposed to the public. And so we were shocked to have to decide for the decision to strip the colour, all the paint off the existing structure. And that led to a collaboration with Sarah Smolders to develop a colour strategy. And that started by a documentation of every single element in the building, understanding how it found its different coloration. An extraordinary horizon layer was discovered, where workers were told to paint parts of the building so you could allocate the parking of cars, and they would just paint as far as they could reach. And if there was a step, they went higher. All of this was documented. All the paint colours were recovered from the existing building, and all the new colours are existing colours. There's no new colour. New colours are the old colours, but put together in different ways. From her sketches, a very elaborate schedule and of definition of how to approach the colour, application of colour was then made. And in the same way, we developed a furniture system for all the furniture in the building, together with Open Structures, an interesting office in Brussels, who defined a template for working within a 4x4 grid. And there they have also very interesting ideas of non-authorship. They don't design anything, they offer a kind of network in which visiting artists and architects incorporate. So we chose to join that network and developed a system based on the 4x4 grid. You can see it maybe on the background of the screen. And with a very few formed elements, we were able to develop the language of all the furniture, which can be made and adjusted within a workshop in the building. So many of these pieces will be dismantled and changed as needs must, but they start as a collection of pieces, some with wheels, some without, but all made of very small parts, and all in a way finding their own representative value. We developed further collaborations with Chevalier Masson, designing the curtains, with Jan Minne, designing the inner mist garden within the Rassembleur building, and with Cartilage Leuven for the wayfinding and the signage. So the building becomes a sort of forum for ideas and shared ambitions. And that idea that position has extended, in fact, even beyond this, to the commissioning of other designers for some of the smaller installations, the reading room, the bookshop, the restaurant, the brasserie, the cultural market, and a children's playground also by other offices. You know, this is a building that is big enough to hold a lot, you know, nothing like, in my opinion, it holds the idea of the 21st century museum, no longer the work of one hand, but by definition, the work of several hands, guided by the vision of the original canal project, the client also, Fondation Canal. And it's a process that's intended to continue after the designers have left the stage. These pictures taken a couple of weeks ago that show the top floor gallery with a loggia that overlooks the city. This is on the right-hand side a view of the street at the entrance. The left, a glass house. You can already see the painting of the floor showing these delicate traces of spaces that used to exist. And the basement gallery with its two massive turned columns, 5.5 meters to the underside of the beam, 7 meters to the underside of the ceiling. And I finish with this image, which I feel encapsulates the project and encapsulates this idea that I started with of layering the new with the old, a kind of sympathy and balance, a sort of democracy of all the components, all the ages of the building to form a new whole, that not one is dominant over the other, but they become a kind of a mesh, a lattice, a layering of spaces between that can be appropriated. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Stefan. Is it working? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. When we
You're going to come and sit next to me, Margot?
no, not so.
Okay.
I'm
Don't know. Okay.
I prefer to stay as a good student. When we met each other in the courtyard a few minutes ago, you tell me you will not speak about domesticity, and I was very surprised. I say, okay, that's a big problem because I know Sergison Bates only about this subject. But now After show your and listen you, I understand better that the question of the domesticity is really central in your work and your way of thinking the space. In fact, here I think in the 3 projects you show us, you were looking for the scale of domesticity, and it begins with something very important today for architects, and even more when you work in an existing place. It's attention politics, politique de l'attention in French. You have to be very precise, very attentive to everything. And I see something very special in your approach and very necessary today. This politics, this attentions politics, is focused on experience. Experience with your body, experience with your memory, experience with collective events, everything. And this way of thinking about experience at the beginning of the project is a very specific approach. You maybe, I don't know if you know that, but in France today, the project begins by materials. We speak about material, where it's coming from, how it's transformed, everything. And begin with experience. It's a very rare, it's not so doing in France today. And I think the way you present it was very powerful, because you present it as a social and political way to do projects. So it's how to say, it's a pleasure to hear that, because I think it's an old way of doing projects. And when we meet each other a few minutes ago, you tell me it's work on the existing, ça nous force pas, but it encourages us, architects, to get back to the fundamentals. And I think beginning with the experience, it's the fundamentals of architecture. But I have to ask you a question, because the question of the material as a way of speak about an experience of the city, of his history, of your memory, using the material for doing that with architecture. I think it's a part of your project for house and collective housing. It's an hypothesis. So I would like to hear you about the material logic in this kind of project, because there is a big paradox in the 3 projects you show us, that there are no materials. There is only transparency. There is no facade. And at the end, there is furniture, a lot, but there is no materials. I love this picture because there is concrete.
I think when you visit, it's very material.
There is a lot of materials. But so in your as fund, because you always speak about as fund, in your as fund, there is always materials, or where it is?
Okay. Wow, Margot. I took notes because this was a long, because I don't want to miss anything. First of all, I mean, I made this lecture for you today. I don't, for me it was time to speak about the public projects. 3 weeks ago I gave a lecture which was about domesticity. But I feel it represents a lot of what's going on, in our experience of practice at the moment. not just the projects, the opportunities in the projects, but actually in grappling with the reality of working with existing buildings and working with public buildings. You know, I'm just an architect. I've just, you know, like everybody start with very little. And now when you make a big interior, I mean, I make houses, you know. I'm not a public architect, but when those opportunities come, it's very challenging and can be intellectually stimulating. You mentioned domesticity. You know, at the root of architecture must be, you know, this kind of idea of inhabitation, the support that we as architects make for those who occupy. And you also describe the interest in experience. I am particularly interested in raising consciousness within those who encounter work. It's not about me, it's about them. The position of a door handle or at this small scale, or the decision about an all-over material. You know, these things affect experience, and with that is a big responsibility and needs to be handled very carefully. And so, you know, in our earlier practice, earlier days, we were working out these ideas of experience on small, often domestic projects. And the point I was really trying to make in the very beginning was this: that nothing's changed. You know, the as found, the interest in experience, and the experience that starts by observing the city and observing the intimate parts of the city are just necessary information to be able to make a public project. And you mentioned in France you start with materials. I find that really interesting because when Jonathan and I first started in practice, we actually started with materials as well. I mean, there was no money on the projects, but we were very interested in, as influenced by, you know, 1960s minimalism, working with industrial produced material like plywood or cement panels, and we would sort of know that we were working with that material from the very beginning, and so we would find some kind of answer in that material. And there was a shift, I remember exactly, where we made a competition in Bornholm in Denmark for an art space, a museum, and suddenly it was freedom. You know, you didn't have to design lots of windows. It wasn't about repetition. It was about a wall with a window. And we set about making form. We didn't worry about material because we realized that when you start with material, the form almost is there. So we sort of wanted to liberate ourselves to make our first public building away from material. So we sort of we said we don't know what the material is, but we just started to shape the project. And in fact, it started to become sort of art, you know, strangely, these sort of smokehouse towers. And then it became brick. I mean, but it was a really good idea to use brick. You know, a small material can make extraordinary shapes. So we started with material, and then we kind of moved away from that. And of course, with experience, your repertoire increases, and we feel more free but material is still fundamental. And I can tell you that the experience of any of those, well, at least hopefully 2 of them will be finished and built. They're very material internally, but they're presented without much fuss, you know. Oh. Later, yeah. I just wanted to also say that this topic and this lecture is also grappling, as my teaching does, with a new level of uncertainty that I think we are experiencing as architects. It's not just the uncertainty of the economic upheaval of certain political leaders in the world, with war, with the difficulty of material movement, and the cost of things. But it's actually the uncertainty that comes with an emphasis on reusing what we have in front of us, where that becomes an imperative, not just a, almost I believe it should be anyway, a kind of starting point. But with that comes a challenge to the conventions of architecture that we've all learnt. The ideas of proportion and the ideas of knowing the detail and knowing the material beforehand. I mean, we're working on a project in the moment in Hasselt where it's on site and we still don't know all the materials in the project because it will depend on what we can find and recycle from various parts of the area. And so this uncertainty, I think, challenges all of us to ask, where's the architecture? What is architecture? So I find the public projects are also really, that is full face kind of issue. And then you mentioned transparency and no facades. It sounds like I'm an ultra-modernist architect. Well, of course, I spend most of my time denying that modernism was very helpful. But, of course, it was there, and we're all part of it. But I mentioned the Kulturhuset, Peter Selsing, who, was not a kind of a high-tech architect, but was interested in porosity. I think I prefer the notion of porosity than transparency because porosity is a sort of social idea as well. It's not, transparency suggests, well, and I suppose it doesn't. It can be just both physical but being open, but porosity feels more complex, I think. And one thing's for sure, these ideas, like any good building, needs to be complex. It needs to be layered, needs to be understood at different levels, and new things discovered on different encounters. So that was my answer.
Perfect. Beautiful answer. Thank you.
Whatever the question was.
Good evening.
Hello.
I wanted to come back on the definition that you gave from to the canal. You said it was for you like the 21st century museum, and I find that first very interesting, especially as you said, so many events and moments happen at the same time.
Yes.
Which is very nice. I feel like it's very nice to have this kind of space. And I wanted to make also a parallel with all the layering in this space. And I don't know, I feel like the 21st century has also this information overload aspect that can be pretty negative. And I wanted to know, how do you think you can prevent this overwhelmingness in your space, in this museum? Because there's so many elements, there's so many things happening at the same time, which can be great, but can be also overwhelming. How can you deal with this?
Really good, really nice question. I think, because I really agree with you. I think one of the consequences of adding layers and making them visible is a kind of, sometimes an overload. You think of bricolage, and when everything is presented equally, it can be overwhelming. So I really understand that. Within the canal situation, what you've maybe realized that if I present this again, I need to show the quiet places, the secret places, because just as the large streets are sort of for 800 people, 1,000 people to move along, there are secondary routes with side staircases, but then there are third routes which you sort of find, and there are definitely places in this building that you could be alone and you could be completely silent. It would be quiet. So I think that, that's something that I've learned, because I'm new to making very public buildings, but I brought that sort of from my other work to understand that you need to there's a certain comfort being within the, let's say, proximity of many other people, but that isn't the case for everybody. You know, we were, for example, very keen that you could filter into the building without being seen, for example. So there are different ways in. But you're talking about the visual layering and the, let's say, potential clutter. I think when you visit, I hope you will see that there is a lot of definition. There are moments of, let's say, collage, but I noticed, for me it's a reaction from the existing building, that when I first visited and looked up, I just sort of saw this cloud over the ceiling. It gave me a single impression of, well, it was quite beautiful actually, the way the light was coming in. But it was, the more you look at it, the more complex it gets. And I found it not overwhelming, but deeply rich. And we often referred to the Crystal Palace, 1851 palace, in which not many people think of it as a full polychrome project. It was full color with different surfaces colored. And the different colors give an overall sensation. And I think that many parts of the layering give an overall sensation, not always let's say, a conflictive one. But I'm going to keep that observation close to me, because I think I don't pretend to, let's say, have an answer, because it could be that it is overwhelming in some parts. And I would say that, you know, all of us are learning a lot on this project. You know, none of the 3 offices have designed such a big building. There's inevitably a level of experimentation, and there's a lot of doubt, a lot of excitement, a lot of I'm thinking to myself, I was saying to Mathieu today, that I think we'll discover what wasn't necessary. You know? You have to build often to work out. If you revisit a project, I revisited a project today, it helped me see what wasn't really that important, which when we were designing or working on site, it felt very important, but it wasn't very important when the building is in place. So there's a lot to learn. We don't know. Maybe we'll bump into each other one day in the museum and we can decide if it's too much or not. But yeah, thanks for that.
So thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to go back to when you were speaking about a concept of threshold, or rather the lack of threshold.
Sorry, could you just say that again? I missed that.
Yes, sorry. Do you understand me now? So I wanted to go back to when you were speaking about the concept of threshold.
Threshold.
Or rather the lack of threshold in your buildings. Well, I really appreciate your work, because I feel like it's so beautiful the way that your buildings open to the sky, to the city. You create spaces of continuity, of fluid circulation. However, I find your buildings particularly striking in an urban landscape. And so I wanted to ask you, where do you draw the line between continuity and contrast in your buildings? Mm-hmm. Because I feel like there's a lot of play right there.
Yeah. I mean, now another really nice question, because threshold is a complex thing, and you know, showing 3 projects which were consciously exploring the removal or the blurring of a threshold doesn't necessarily represent everything that we do. I mean, it was an appropriate strategy in these 3 public projects. I'm equally interested in very defined thresholds, you know, understanding the containing of a space. And so when you say, where do I draw the line? My answer would be, the line is drawn to meet an appropriate task, you know? So for us with the MHKA, the first project, it was really important that the public park just ran straight into this hangar, you know, absolutely flush. I've never done that before. I've never achieved that before. But that's because it really needed to feel like the ground floor needed to draw the public, draw people into the building. but another situation would require maybe the opposite. So, I mean, in the end, it's really, I mean, these three projects are exploring this idea of porosity. We need to build them to, like, test the consequences, let's say. You know, usually in our work, we always define a threshold, even if it's flush. You know, the door, the space in the door, we make a different material. You know, and in fact, in most of our projects, and indeed in the galleries in KANAL, we make a 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter up step, so your foot doesn't trip, but you feel that you're walking through a wall. You know, the floor doesn't flow through. You know, it has a rather traditional threshold. So anyway, thank you for those nice things that you said about the projects. And yeah, they're all about blurring the threshold, but our next project might not be.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hey, Stephen Bates. I want to show my appreciation before I ask the question, because I was really amazed by the background that you're coming from, with the mix of architecture from Germany, from Netherlands, from England, and also with a time in Switzerland. I see in the three projects that you kind of present, there's a strong sense of the renovation, or in German we have the word of Umbau, and I'm kind of realized it also kind of the not the trend, but like the orientation in the new way of architecture, looking at the new project or the competition. When we also saw that with the help of AI and the help of all kind of new tools, with the structure, with the recycle, with the environment problems, architecture right now is not like the one man like Van Gehry or Le Corbusier who designed the drawing from A to Z.
Yeah.
It's also more of the play up with the technical thing, with the engineering thing. But it's make architecture lost its creativity. So in this kind of 21st century, when we see all the competition, when you have a site of a building that is abandoned, a Bahnhof, a gare that is left, always the first solution is renovation, is keep as much as the structure. But would you see that is like the way that architect in this century is getting through, of got to force to embrace all the old structure? So that was the question. And what is like maybe your vision on the architecture in the late 21st century with the help of AI in the design process? If maybe we find any new ways to put the creativity on the design process. Thank you.
You know, I really think that architecture is going through a kind of existential moment because of, as I described before, the necessary response to a very uncertain future, but certainly climate change needs a new way of thinking. And I think we're in transition. You know, we're not, I don't think anyone knows the answer to this. We have to work our way through it. But we also need, in my opinion, architecture should lead the reuse debate. It should lead the sustainability debate. It's not about solely AI or solely schedules and calculations, and you know, all of which are vital, but they're not, I mean, they're empirical. They need expression. And architecture, the role of architecture is that it has a cultural dimension. It should be about ideas and it should represent things. Reuse is just a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So to me, it's a really interesting moment. I feel as a teacher and a practicing architect that I'm in the middle of that and trying to work things out. You work things out usually by, well, in one way, by building things. I think, I mean, we are all using AI more and more. We also probably don't understand it, do we? You could fear in some. I think it will change practice radically. I was saying to people, I feel like an office like ours probably won't exist in 10 years. I think we will be sort of involved in an early stage of a project to give it traction and an idea, and then something else will produce. There'll be too much pressure on the client and the contractor to produce it somewhere else for like a small percentage of the cost. And I think so the days of a practice like ours that likes to build and deliver completely the project and run it on site, etc., I don't know if that will exist anymore. So your generation will see this change. Or probably all of you will have to decide to take your place within that changing situation. And I don't think we should be like negative. I don't think we should be anxious. I think it's about embracing it, embracing AI, embracing what reuse means, asking questions. That's very, very important that's what we do. So to me, it's just a shifting landscape, and it's a new landscape than one 10 years ago. And I mentioned in the KANAL, our mantra was to be radically optimistic, and I'm an optimist. I think we should all be radically optimistic because, let's face it, in this rather polarized political and social climate that the whole of Europe is in, we need to be optimistic because someone has to be. Not sure.
All together on the terrace.
Okay.
Yeah, to have a drink. Thank you, Stefan. Non, je t'ai marché par où,